Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the kitchen. Welcome back to Sunday morning and the Old Cookbook Show. Today, we're going to touch on a recipe that we did probably a couple of months ago called hamburger pancakes, and that was out of this cookbook, the Laura Secord Canadian Cookbook. And at the time, when we made them, I read the story out, and it went a little bit like this. And there's a story that goes with this recipe, and the story is: an ingenious homemaker from Saskatchewan shows us how to stretch half a pound of ground beef. Undoubtedly, the recipe is born of necessity, perhaps during the Depression years when Saskatchewan suffered the worst drought in history. Great story. Problem is, I went back through all of the Canadian cookbooks that I own, and I can't find any mention of this recipe in any of the Canadian cookbooks from about the mid-1920s until World War II. And so that idea that this recipe probably didn't originate on the prairies in the 1930s stuck with me. I kind of had the feeling that this was something that went back further. And so I was always looking for those recipes that could have been the starting point of hamburger pancakes. And it took me a little while, and I don't know that I've exactly cracked it, but I came across a few recipes that sort of get me a little bit closer to what I think is the origin of the hamburger pancakes in this 1967 cookbook, Canadian cookbook. And so the first one that I came across that sort of was leading me in the right direction, the recipe that we're making says to crack 2 eggs in the bottom of a pint measuring cup, fill it with milk, and then mix it together. The first recipe that I came across that sort of was leading me down this path is from this cookbook, published in 1915 here in Toronto, called the Toronto Queen City of Canada Cookbook. And it has a recipe, fricandills. And it is cold beef, veal, or any other meat. The more variety, the better. Hash it fine. Mix it with 2 eggs, a little grated onion, melted butter, 2 pulverized soda biscuits, pepper, salt, form into balls, and fry in butter. So it is, for all intents and purposes, a meatball recipe. Slightly different than the hamburger pancakes, but it was a bit of a mystery that I kept coming back to. Because it's one of those words, the title of the recipe, is one of those words that when you know how you search for something on Google and you put it in and there's millions and millions and millions of responses to it. Thousands of pages of Google results. And it's overwhelming and you don't know where to start. And you usually don't make it past the second or third page. This time the exact opposite happened. Google returned 2 pages of results. And at the top of the page of results, it said, did you actually mean tricandills? Tricandills, that is a French dish that consists of pork intestines that are grilled or fried with mushrooms. Pretty good recipe, actually. Pretty good recipe. But not what I was looking for. Dead end. Complete dead end. Then, this cookbook shows up in the mail from a viewer. Thank you very much for sending it in. It's called A Feast of Good Things. It is a church cookbook from the First Presbyterian Church in Ohio, Tiffin, Ohio, and it is published in 1923. It has a recipe for something called tricadillas. And I don't know if that's how you say it because, again, it's not a real word. That's what we're making here today. And so I get this one, tricadillas, and I look at it and I think, okay, that's closer to the hamburger pancakes. A little bit different. I mean, there's milk and there's egg and there's meat and there's onion and butter and those sort of things. But it led me down, and finally I came to the conclusion that probably what they're trying to say is fricadeller. Again, probably not pronouncing that correctly. So I've got ground beef, ground lamb, and ground veal. I'm supposed to put that into my mixing bowl. Now, what I'm supposed to do is add this milk and egg mixture in here and beat it as if it was a cake. And so I think this is one of the really interesting things about these old cookbooks, especially from Canada and the United States. Both countries are countries of immigrants. And so you get people coming in They bring recipes from their home country. They bring the recipes with them. They change a little bit when they get here because they don't have access to maybe some spicing or some ingredients. And then someone down the street tries the dish, says, oh, that's fantastic. Can I write out the recipe? And then they misinterpret what the name is. And they may misinterpret some of the ingredients as well. They may misinterpret some of the method. And you end up with something that's a little bit different. And then it ends up in a church cookbook or a community cookbook, and it gets changed again, and it gets changed again. And then it shows up in this cookbook in the 1960s. And I'm not saying it, this is the transition, but I can see how this recipe here transitions into other recipes and then ends up as something like hamburger pancakes on the prairies in the 1960s. Okay, so I've switched to a really heavy-duty whisk. Not all whisks or wire whisks are the same. Some balloon whisks have really fine mesh. This one is for doing heavier batters. It's very stiff. Now, we fry this in butter, but first I'm supposed to fry an onion, a sliced onion in the pan, and then take the sliced onion out. I imagine we're just seasoning the butter to add a little bit of flavor to the meat. Which, in the other recipes, you're adding the onion directly to the meat. Okay, so in go the onions, and we'll just give them a little bit of a fry. And then I'm going to turn the heat down. It says to fry these gently, so turn the heat down, take the onions out. We'll serve the onions alongside the meat patties. And then we drop in the meat. Okay, this mixture is really, really loose, and I don't know how well it's going to come together for me to flip them. I would have expected that I'd be able to flip them like I'd flip a hamburger or a meatball. I don't know. It doesn't look promising at this point. Okay, let's see. There we go. Okay, I think these are cooked. So we'll get them out onto a plate. We're supposed to serve them with peas and mashed potatoes, I think, but just for the sake of tasting them, Jules and I will just taste these. And
hey,
Jules.
Hi! I see we've served up. Oh, meat pancakes.
Yes. So
Did we not do that recipe already?
we did.
This one looks a little different.
It is a little different. I'm gonna cook another one there and see how that works. It is.
It's a little more pancake.
It is. It's a lot looser than the last one that we did. And so I went back and the whole process for this. There was a game show in the 60s, and I think it was called Concentration, where it had all the squares on the board, and you had to choose two squares, and they turned the squares over, and if they had the same thing beneath it, they pulled them off, and then you got to see this. There was a mystery clue behind them, but you had to match the squares, and you had to remember where all the squares were. Anyway, a little bit like that.
I'm not doing...
My whole process with this is a little bit like that. I see something, I go, oh yeah, I should remember that and come back to that. And then I see something else, and it's like, oh, maybe that links back to, what book was that in? Because I've got so many books on the go, and there's so many little yellow things sticking out of books that...
There are a lot of yellow things.
It's a little bit like whack-a-mole, trying to come back to everything. But I think these three recipes are all related somehow. I mean, there's no...
Tastes like fried meat.
Yeah. There's no salt or pepper in it. There's no spicing or herbs of any kind.
Okay. Yeah, I would. Perhaps I'm supposed to salt it after.
Yeah, a little bit of salt would really help.
Some of that onion probably would have helped too.
The onion, I guess the other things that you put with it are supposed to help, but...
So is this recipe older than the one we did from the...
Yeah, so this
Okay.
is from the 20s.
Okay.
And then I found it in that one, that's from 1915.
Okay.
But
Did we do that one, that chop suey recipe?
No, but it's close to one that we've done.
Okay. Yeah, so because it's cooking like a pancake. It's got the little bubbles, like, yeah. Pancakes are done when you flip them when you have the little bubbles. Maybe not
yet.
that one.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not enough bubbles in that yet. We'll have to see how that turns out.
So I think this is a case of, like I said earlier, broken telephone. Someone hears the recipe, hears a name, writes it down incorrectly, writes down what they thought they heard, and then it gets into a book, and it gets published, and it gets changed, and it gets changed, and it gets changed, and it becomes something else, and it morphs over time. And I think that's a big part of cooking in North America, is that mashup of everything that you see from everywhere, and how things get changed.
The salt helps a little bit.
Yeah. So
For me anyway.
I've got mashed potatoes on the go inside the house. We'll
Okay.
cook this up. I think this needs a lot of work, though. I really do think
Well,
this needs a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not quite there.
Yeah.
Although I kind of like the thin.
I mean, the idea is great. It just needs some extras to bring some flavor to it. Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon. And I guess if you've made it to this point after the credits,
Thank you.
thank you, and let us know. I mean, the great thing about the internet is that this reaches a lot of people in a lot of different places with a lot of different ideas and different experiences. Have you experienced or come across recipes called this? And do you think I'm going down the right path by saying that these are all some form of fricadiller? Not pronouncing that correctly at all. Anyway,
not know.
again, thanks for stopping by. See you again soon.
Oh, that went nice.
Yeah, not too bad.
Ha!